Ever have one of those, research nightmares where your big breakthrough is right there, ready to go, but it all comes crashing down because of, like, one tiny little ethical detail you totally missed?
Oh, absolutely. It's like the ultimate researcher's fear, right? I mean, that's exactly why getting that proposal right, especially all those ethical considerations, is so incredibly crucial.
Okay, so let's break this whole thing down for our listeners.
Mm.
Say you're sitting down, ready to write a research proposal. What's like the very first thing you absolutely have to get right?
Informed consent, hands down. And it's way more than just like a form or something, you know? It's about making sure, really making sure that your participants really get what they're signing up for. You got to think plain language, no jargon, and just total transparency about, the risks and the benefits.
So, like, just to make sure I'm following you,
Hmm.
if I was doing, let's say, a study on the effects of, I don't know, a new meditation app or something, I couldn't just like hand someone a big, complicated legal document and be like, all right, you're good to go.
Exactly. Yeah. You'd really need to break it down for them. Explain in simple terms, like what does the study actually involve? How will their data be used? What are the potential, discomforts or even benefits they might experience? All that stuff.
Makes sense. And then what about like all those data privacy rules and regulations? I feel like that's a whole other minefield these days, right?
Oh, it can be for sure. But it's manageable, especially if you prepared. Think about things like GDPR and APINA, right? All those regulations, they're all about protecting sensitive information. So your proposal, it really needs to lay out exactly how you'll handle that data, ensure confidentiality and just how you'll comply with all those legal
So
requirements.
encryption, secure storage, restricted access, that kind of thing.
Precisely. And don't forget those data privacy considerations, they apply across the board. It doesn't matter if you're dealing with medical records or personal interviews or even just online surveys.
Okay, got it. So we've covered informed consent, data privacy for human participants, all that good stuff. What about research? Research that involves animals. What are like the big ethical things to consider there?
Well, animal welfare, it's got to be paramount. Like your proposal, it has to demonstrate this deep commitment to ethical treatment. That means, outlining all the steps to really minimize any pain or distress the animals might experience, ensure they have proper housing and care, and, really justifying why using animal subjects is absolutely necessary for your research.
So it's about like minimizing harm as much as possible and only using animals when there's, absolutely no other way to answer your research question.
Yes, exactly. And it's also about having a clear plan for monitoring their well-being throughout the entire study. Ethical research, it really is good research. When you put these considerations first, it really strengthens the credibility and the integrity of all your work.
For sure. I know you can't just like, tell the research gods you've got all this covered. There's that whole institutional review board thing, right? The IRB. They're the ones who actually give you the thumbs up or down, right?
Yeah, that's right. The IRB, it's basically a committee of, you know, experts, researchers, ethicists, people from the community, and they review all those research proposals to make sure, they meet the highest ethical and regulatory standards. They're kind of like the gatekeepers, right? Making sure you've really thought through everything.
So they'll be looking at things like my informed consent process, how I'm
Hmm.
handling data, my plans for animal welfare, everything we've been talking about so far.
Exactly. Yep. And they'll be looking for like specifics too, not just, vague promises. It's got to be a clear, detailed plan that really demonstrates your commitment to doing things, ethically.
Makes sense. So, okay, let's say I've like really poured over all these ethical considerations, dotted all my I's, crossed my T's. The IRB gives me the green light. I'm finally ready to start collecting that data. What happens then?
That's when the whole data management and integrity thing becomes super critical. Think of it like this, right? Your data, it's the foundation of your entire research project. If that foundation's shaky or, compromised in any way, well, your findings, they're going to be questionable at best.
So how do you make sure your data is, rock solid? I mean, really make sure it's good.
It starts with meticulous data collection and processing. You really need to have those clear protocols in place. Got to prevent, any errors or bias from creeping in. And it doesn't just stop there. You also need to think about how you're going to store and manage all that data securely.
Okay. So we're talking about things like encryption and access controls, right?
Yeah.
All those things to keep that data safe from prying eyes.
Absolutely. And it's not just about protecting the data itself either. It's about about maintaining participant confidentiality. Remember all those regulations we talked about earlier? HIPAA for healthcare data, FERPA for educational records. You have to be aware of like the specific rules that apply to your research and build compliance into your whole data management plan.
So it's like a multi-layered approach to data security, right?
Yeah.
Protecting the information itself, and at the same time, ensuring the privacy of the people, the people behind that data.
Exactly. It's about treating that data with the same care and respect, the same care and respect that you would treat your research participants. Yeah, it's a lot like building a house.
Oh, I see what you mean. You got to have that strong foundation to like support everything else that comes after.
Exactly, yeah. If your data's all shaky, the whole research project could, like, crumble.
And nobody wants that. So, okay, let's talk about like that final stage of the research process.
Yeah.
Sharing your findings with the world.
Ugh. Data sharing and publication, that's where it all, comes to life. But it's also where those ethical considerations, they're still super important.
I bet. Especially like when it comes to protecting participant privacy.
Absolutely. You can't just, throw all that raw data out there without thinking about the potential consequences.
So like, what are some of the key things researchers need to keep in mind when it comes to, sharing their data ethically?
Well, first and foremost, you got to de-identify that data. That means like removing any info that could potentially link the data back to, individual participants.
So like names, addresses, dates of birth, all that stuff, anything that could be used to like identify someone specifically.
Exactly. And even those, seemingly harmless details, things like zip codes or occupations, even those can sometimes be used to identify people. So you got to be really, really careful.
What about like those situations where sharing identifiable data is actually, beneficial? Like I'm thinking maybe in genetic research where participants might actually want to know about like potential health risks or something.
That's where that informed consent we talked about earlier, that comes back into play big time. You got to be super upfront with your participants about, how their data is going to be used. Give them the option to consent to different levels of data sharing.
So it's all about like transparency and, giving participants control over their information.
Precisely. And it's not just about protecting individual privacy either. It's also about maintaining the integrity of your research.
How so? Like, how does that play into it?
Well, think about it. If people don't trust that their data will be handled ethically, they might be, less likely to participate in research in the first place.
Right. That makes sense. Participation in research, like, relies so heavily on public trust.
Exactly. And that trust, it's built on a foundation of ethical research practices, right? From the initial proposal all the way to that final publication.
So it's like a chain reaction. Ethical considerations at every stage, they all contribute to the overall trustworthiness and impact of research.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, it's all connected.
Now, I know there are all sorts of different platforms and repositories out there for sharing research data. What are some of the key things researchers should consider when choosing where to share their findings?
Well, it's super important to choose like a reputable platform, one that aligns with your research goals and, all those ethical considerations.
Are there like any specific platforms that that you would recommend?
There are a ton of great options out there. Honestly, the best choice really depends on, the type of data you're sharing and the specific requirements of your field. Some popular repositories, though, include Zenodo, Figshare, and the Open Science Framework.
Okay, so like do your homework, basically, and find a platform that fits your needs and, prioritizes data security and all those ethical sharing practices.
Exactly. And don't forget to check the data sharing policies of any journals you're hoping to publish in.
Right. Different journals have different requirements. Right?
Yeah, for sure. Some journals, they require open data sharing. So that means you got to make your data like publicly available as soon as it's published, while other journals, they might have more restrictive policies.
So it's another one of those things where you really need to do your research up front.
Absolutely. The key is just, to be transparent about your data sharing plans from the very beginning.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from informed consent to data management to publication ethics.
We really have. We've kind of explored the whole life cycle of a research project, through that lens of ethical considerations.
And it's clear that ethics, it's not just an afterthought, right? It's something that needs to be like baked into every single stage of the research process.
Couldn't agree more. It's about approaching research with a sense of, responsibility, knowing that Our actions, they have the potential to impact individuals, communities, even the advancement of knowledge itself.
Well said. Now, before we wrap up, I'd love to hear your thoughts on something that's been, like, on my mind.
I'm all ears.
We've talked about the importance of, ethical research proposals and all that. But what about the role of, like, institutions in all of this, in fostering a culture of ethics?
Hmm.
What can universities and research organizations do to really support researchers
Yeah.
in navigating all these, complex issues?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's easy to get so caught up in, the details of our own research, all those little things. But we got to remember, like, we're all part of this bigger, research
Yeah,
ecosystem.
right.
Yeah, so ethical research, it's not just about like individual researchers, doing the right thing. It's about creating a whole culture where those ethical considerations, they're actually valued, where they're supported at every level.
Okay, so like what does that actually look like in practice? What can institutions actually do to really foster that kind of environment?
Well, I think for starters, they got to provide, really clear, accessible training on research ethics, and not just for, researchers, but for everyone involved, students, faculty, administrators, the whole nine yards.
Yeah, that makes sense because it's not just about knowing the rules, right? It's about like really understanding why those rules exist, the principles behind them and how to actually apply them in real world situations.
Exactly. And that training, it shouldn't be just like a one-time thing, It's got to be an ongoing process, something that evolves as the whole landscape of research ethics changes.
Right, right. And it's not just about training either. Institutions, they also need to create like systems and structures that actually support ethical research practices, don't they?
They do. Think about things like accessible IRB review processes,
Right.
resources for data management and security, clear guidelines for, data sharing and publication, that kind of stuff.
And maybe even like mentorship programs too, where, more experienced researchers can like actually guide newer researchers through those ethical, complexities of their work.
Absolutely. Mentorship is huge. It can be so valuable for fostering that culture of ethical research. It's about creating a space where researchers they feel comfortable, like they can ask questions, raise concerns, seek guidance, all that.
So it's about building a community of support around research ethics,
Right.
not just like a set of rules to follow.
Exactly. When researchers, they feel supported in their ethical decision making, well, they're just more likely to conduct research that's both rigorous and responsible.
And that ultimately, benefits everyone. Because at the end of the day, ethical research, it's about at advancing knowledge in a way that benefits society as a whole.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about ensuring that, that whole pursuit of knowledge, it's always conducted with integrity, with respect,
Yeah.
and with a commitment to the well-being of everyone involved.
Well said. Well, this has been a truly fascinating exploration of, all those ethical considerations that go into research proposal writing.
It really has. It's been a pleasure, diving into these important topics with you.
And to all our listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us on this journey. We really hope you've gained some valuable insights that'll help you, navigate that whole ethical landscape of research and to do it with confidence and integrity. And remember, ethical research, it's a shared responsibility. And by working together, well, we can create a future where knowledge is advanced ethically and for the benefit of all.